The cemetery sat on a hillside outside Bandera, Texas, where the limestone cliffs met endless sky, and the Medina River wound through valleys that had seen bloodshed and beauty in equal measure. Tyler Morrison had ridden past that particular graveyard 100 times since returning to town 3 months ago, but this morning in late spring of 1878, something made him slow his horse to a walk and then stop altogether. A woman knelt among the graves, her hands working the rocky soil with determination that spoke of practice and purpose. She wore a simple calico dress the color of cornflowers, and her dark hair was pulled back beneath a wide-brimmed hat that protected her face from the climbing sun. But what caught his attention was not her presence alone. It was the basket beside her overflowing with wildflowers, and the deliberate way she moved from headstone to headstone, planting something at each one. Tyler dismounted, leading his mare closer but keeping enough distance to avoid startling her. His boots crunched on the dry grass, and she turned, her hands stilling in the earth. Her face was sun-touched and lovely, with hazel eyes that held both wariness and a deep sadness he recognized from his own reflection. "Morning," he said, removing his hat in respect for both her and the dead surrounding them. "Hope I am not disturbing you." She sat back on her heels, studying him with those thoughtful eyes. "This is a cemetery. Everyone here is already disturbed, I suppose." The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, transforming what might have been a melancholy face into something warmer. "But no, you are not interrupting anything that cannot wait a moment." He took a few steps closer, careful not to tread on any graves. From this distance, he could see what she was planting: bluebonnets and Indian paintbrushes, bright spots of color against the weathered gray stones. "That is kind work you are doing. Someone should remember them," she said simply, returning her attention to the grave before her. Her fingers worked the soil loose, creating a small hollow for the plant she held. "Most of these men died alone or far from home. The least they deserve is something beautiful to mark their passing." Tyler looked around the cemetery with new eyes. She had been busy. He could see flowers blooming at perhaps a dozen graves, all of them simple markers with names and dates carved rough into wood or stone. Most were old, dating back 10 or 15 years to the hard times just after the war. "You do this often?" he asked. "Every week," she replied. "I started about 6 months ago. There are too many to do all at once, so I work my way through making sure each one gets tended." She paused, brushing dirt from her hands. "You are Tyler Morrison." It was not a question, and the certainty in her voice made him shift his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "I am." "I thought so." She stood, wiping her palms on her apron. "My name is Delilah Andrews. Your mother pointed you out to me in town a few weeks back, though we were never properly introduced." "Miss Andrews," he said, nodding. Then, because he could not help his curiosity, "How long have you been in Bandera?" "Coming up on a year now. I moved here after my father passed. He had a brother here who offered me a place to stay and work in his general store." She picked up her basket and moved to the next grave, and Tyler found himself following, still leading his horse. "And you returned from where, exactly? I heard talk you had been gone quite some time." 7 years, he said, the words coming easier than they had in previous conversations with other townspeople. Something about her straightforward manner invited honesty. "I left when I was 20, went north first, then west. Did some ranching, some guiding, tried my hand at prospecting, though I was no good at it." "What brought you back?" Tyler looked out across the cemetery, at the town visible in the valley below, at the familiar landscape that had haunted his dreams during his wandering years. "Guess I got tired of running." Delilah glanced up at him, and in that look he saw understanding. "We have that in common, then." She knelt at the next grave, one marked with a simple wooden cross and a name worn almost illegible by weather, Samuel Chen, 1850–1868. She planted bluebonnets there with the same care she had shown the others, her movements practiced and gentle. "Did you know any of these men?" Tyler asked. "No, most died before I arrived, but I learned their stories." She brushed soil from the marker. "Samuel Chen worked on the railroad until he came here looking for a fresh start. He was only 18 when he was killed trying to stop a horse from trampling a child in the street. Saved the child but was kicked in the head." Her voice carried no drama, just a quiet recitation of facts that somehow made the tragedy more real. "The town buried him, but nobody tended his grave after that first year." Tyler crouched beside her, reading the dates again. The math was simple and sobering. He was just a kid. A lot of them were. She moved to another grave and Tyler followed. This stone was better kept, the letters still clear. James Morrison, 1841–1872. The name hit him like a fist to the chest. His older brother. The marker looked different from when he had left town, better maintained. Flowers already grew here, well-established plants that had been there more than one season. "You have been planting flowers on my brother's grave," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Delilah looked at him with those gentle, serious eyes. "I have. I plant them on all the graves, but his was one of the first I tended. Your brother was something of a local legend from what I have heard." Tyler stared at the stone, memories flooding back. James had been everything a big brother should be. Strong, brave, quick to laugh and quicker to defend those who needed it. He had been the town's deputy, respected and loved by nearly everyone who knew him. "He was shot breaking up a robbery," Tyler said, the words mechanical, repeated from the telegram that had found him 2 years too late in a mining camp in Colorado. "I was not here." "I know," Delilah said softly. "I have heard people talk about him. They said he was fearless, that he never backed down from doing what was right. They said he was the kind of man who made everyone around him want to be better. He was." Tyler reached out and touched the stone, feeling the warmth of the sun trapped in its surface. "I should have been here. I should have been the one wearing the deputy badge, but I ran off chasing some fool dream of adventure." "You were young," Delilah said. "We all have to find our own path. My path meant he died alone. He died protecting others. That was who he was, Tyler. Whether you were here or not would not have changed what happened that day." She said it matter-of-factly, without judgment, and somehow that made it easier to hear. "But I understand why you carry that weight. I carry my own." He looked at her, seeing past the surface to the grief she kept carefully controlled. "Your father, among others." She turned back to the grave, adjusting the flowers that were already there. "I was caring for my father when he got sick. I tried everything, every remedy I knew, but nothing worked. He suffered for 6 months before he finally passed. I keep thinking if I had been smarter, more knowledgeable about medicine, maybe I could have saved him." "That is not how sickness works," Tyler said gently. "Some things are beyond our power to fix. I know that in my head." She touched her temple, then her heart, but knowing it here does not always help it here. They stayed there in the cemetery for another hour, and Tyler found himself helping her plant flowers at grave after grave. She told him stories about each person buried there, stories she had collected from old-timers and town records, and patient listening. She had made it her mission to know these forgotten men, to give them back their humanity with flowers and remembrance. When her basket was finally empty, they walked back toward town together, Tyler leading his horse while Delilah carried her tools and empty basket. The morning had grown warm, and cicadas sang in the trees lining the road. "Why do you do it?" he asked as they walked. "The flowers, the stories." It must take considerable time. Delilah was quiet for a moment, watching the road ahead. When my father died, I felt so lost. I had spent years caring for him, and suddenly that purpose was gone. I came here to start over, but I did not know how. Then one day I was walking past the cemetery and saw how neglected it was, how many graves had no flowers, no sign that anyone remembered the people buried there. It felt wrong. So you decided to fix it. I decided to honor them, she corrected. These were men who came west looking for something better, just like everyone else. Some died heroes like your brother. Others died in accidents or sickness or just bad luck. But they all mattered. They all deserved to be remembered. Tyler looked at her with growing respect and something else, something warmer that he was not quite ready to name. That is a fine thing you are doing. It helps me as much as it helps them, she admitted. Gives me purpose, connects me to this place and its history, makes me feel less alone. They reached the edge of town, where the scattered buildings of Bandera's outskirts began to cluster closer together. The main street was already busy with morning traffic. Wagons hauling goods, horses tied to hitching posts, men and women going about their business in the dusty Texas heat. I could help you, Tyler said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. With the graves, I mean. I have time and 2 people could cover more ground. Plus, I know some of the older stories from before you arrived. Delilah stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Her expression was cautious but not unfriendly. Why would you want to do that? Because you are right, he said. They deserve to be remembered. And because my brother is among them, and you have been honoring his memory when I was not here to do it myself. That means something to me. She studied his face, and he met her gaze steadily, letting her see his sincerity. Finally, she smiled, a real smile that transformed her features and made his heart kick unexpectedly in his chest. I would appreciate the help, she said. Meet me at the cemetery next Saturday morning. Bring a shovel and some water. I will be there, he promised. They parted ways at the general store where she worked, and Tyler continued toward the boarding house where he rented a room. His mind was full of thoughts that had nothing to do with the ranch work he had planned for the day, and everything to do with a woman who planted flowers on forgotten graves. The week that followed seemed to drag endlessly. Tyler worked his job at a local ranch, repairing fences and tending cattle, but his thoughts kept drifting to Saturday morning and the cemetery. He found himself looking forward to it with an anticipation that surprised him, not just the work but the prospect of spending time with Delilah Andrews. He asked questions around town, carefully casual, and learned more about her. She was 25, 3 years younger than him. She had come from a small town outside San Antonio where her father had been a teacher. She was well-read, quiet but friendly, and had earned respect from the townspeople through her steady work and kind manner. She attended church regularly, sang in the choir, and kept mostly to herself outside of her work at the store. Nobody spoke ill of her, which in Tyler's experience was rare in a small town where gossip flowed as freely as whiskey. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and the promise of heat. Tyler was at the cemetery before dawn, wanting to be there when she arrived. He had brought a shovel as requested, along with 2 canteens of water and, on impulse, a package of sandwiches his landlady had pressed on him when he mentioned he was skipping breakfast. Delilah arrived as the sun was cresting the hills, her basket already full of plants she must have dug from the wild places around town. She looked surprised to see him waiting but pleased too, her face lighting with that smile that had stayed in his memory all week. "You are early," she said by way of greeting. "Wanted to make sure I did not keep you waiting," he replied. "I brought food if you are hungry, thoughtful." She set down her basket and accepted a sandwich, and they ate together in the cool morning air, sitting on a flat stone near the cemetery entrance. Around them, birds were waking, their songs filling the air with life that contrasted strangely with their surroundings. "Where do we start?" Tyler asked when they had finished eating. Delilah pulled a small notebook from her apron pocket, its pages covered in neat handwriting. "I keep track of which graves I have planted and which still need attention. There are about 40 more that need work." She flipped through pages, and Tyler caught glimpses of names, dates, and brief notes about each person. "I thought we could work on the older section today, the graves from the late 50s and early 60s. They worked side by side as the morning unfolded, and Tyler found a rhythm in it that soothed something restless in his soul. Delilah would tell him about each man as they planted flowers. A merchant who had died of fever, a former soldier trying to start fresh after the war, a young lawyer killed in a riding accident. She brought them to life with her words, making them more than names on stones. Tyler contributed what he knew, memories from his childhood and stories his father had told. He remembered some of these men from when he was young, vague impressions of faces and voices. Sharing those memories with Delilah felt like giving back something important, like completing a circle. Around noon, they took a break in the shade of an old oak tree that stood at the cemetery's edge. Tyler passed her a canteen, and she drank gratefully, drops of water catching in her hair and glinting like diamonds. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We accomplished twice as much as I could have alone. I am glad to help." He leaned back against the tree trunk. "I have been thinking about what you said last week about finding purpose in this. I think I understand what you mean. I have been back in Bandera for months now, but I have felt like I am just going through motions, working but not really living. This feels different. It feels like it matters." "It does matter," Delilah said firmly. "Everything we do to honor others, to preserve their memory, it all matters. It says that lives have value, that death does not erase what someone meant to this world. You talk like someone who has thought deeply about death." "I have." She was quiet for a moment, turning the canteen in her hands. "Watching my father die changed me. I sat with him for hours toward the end, and I kept thinking about legacy, about what we leave behind. He was a good man who taught children and tried to make the world better through education. But when he died, most of his students had scattered, and there was no grand monument to his life. Just memories and the knowledge that he had made a difference, even if it was not recognized with fanfare. That is more than most people get," Tyler observed. "True. But it made me think about all the people who die with even less recognition, whose contributions are forgotten simply because nobody takes the time to remember. That is why I do this." She gestured around the cemetery. "It is a small thing, but it is something I can do. A way to say their lives mattered." Tyler found himself telling her things he had not shared with anyone else in town, about his years away, the mistakes he had made, the regrets he carried. He told her about working dangerous jobs for low pay, about nearly dying in a mine collapse, about the loneliness that had followed him across territories and states. "I kept thinking if I went far enough, worked hard enough, became someone different, then maybe I could outrun who I was," he said. "But you cannot outrun yourself. I finally figured that out about a year ago, and it took me this long to work up the courage to come home." "Are you glad you did?" Delilah asked. "I am starting to be," he said, meeting her eyes. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. They were both people marked by loss and regret, both trying to find their way back to something solid and true. The recognition was mutual and powerful. They worked until the afternoon heat drove them back toward town, having planted flowers on 8 more graves. They parted with plans to meet again the following Saturday, and Tyler walked away feeling lighter than he had in years. The pattern continued for weeks. Every Saturday they met at the cemetery, sometimes working for just a few hours, other times spending most of the day there. Tyler learned to identify the wildflowers Delilah favored: blue bonnets, Indian paintbrush, Mexican hat, and black-eyed Susans. She taught him which plants thrived in the rocky soil, how to dig without disturbing old grave sites, how to water efficiently in the hot Texas climate. But more than the practical skills, he learned about her. She loved poetry and could recite long passages from memory. She was terrified of thunderstorms, a fear that dated back to childhood when lightning had struck near her home. She wanted to travel someday, to see the ocean and the mountains and all the places she had only read about. She laughed easily once you got past her initial reserve, and her laugh was like music. Tyler found himself falling for her in increments, each Saturday adding layers to his feelings until they became impossible to ignore. The way she concentrated when she worked, her tongue caught between her teeth, the gentleness of her hands as she planted flowers, the passionate way she spoke about preserving memory and honoring the dead. Everything about her drew him in. He thought she might be feeling something too, caught glimpses of it in the way she smiled when she saw him, in how she leaned closer when they talked, in the small touches that lingered longer than necessary when they worked side by side. But neither of them spoke of it directly, as if putting words to it might break the spell. Summer deepened, and Bandera baked under relentless sun. The cemetery flowers required more water, and Tyler started hauling barrels out from town in a borrowed wagon. It became part of their Saturday routine: plant new flowers in the morning, water everything in the afternoon. One particularly hot day in late July, they finished their work and sought refuge under the oak tree. Tyler had brought extra water, and they splashed it over their faces and arms, laughing at the simple relief of coolness against heated skin. "I have been thinking," Delilah said, her expression thoughtful. "We have covered most of the old graves now. There are maybe 10 more that need attention, and then we will have flowers on every grave in the cemetery." "That is quite an accomplishment," Tyler said. "You should be proud." "We should be proud," she corrected. "I could not have done this without your help." "You have been as dedicated to this as I have." "It has become important to me too," he admitted. "I came back to Bandera not knowing what I was looking for, and somehow I found it here among these graves. Found purpose. Found peace, maybe. Found you." The last words came out before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Delilah's eyes widened slightly, but she did not look away. "Tyler," she said softly. "I know I have no right to say such things," he continued, the words coming in a rush now that he had started. "I know you probably have suitors, men more settled and respectable than a wanderer who only returned home because he had nowhere else to go. But I cannot keep pretending I feel nothing when I am around you. These Saturdays have become the best part of my week, and it is not just because of the work we do. It is because I get to spend time with you." Delilah was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable. Tyler braced himself for rejection, for the gentle letdown he probably deserved. Then she smiled, that beautiful smile that made his heart race. "I have no suitors," she said. "I have been too busy with the cemetery and work to think much about such things, or at least that is what I told myself." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "But the truth is, I have been thinking about you, wondering what you were doing during the week, looking forward to Saturday, telling myself it was just friendship, but knowing it felt like more." "Delilah," he breathed. "I do not know if I am ready for something serious," she said honestly. I am still healing from losing my father, still finding my footing here. But I would like to see where this goes if you are willing to be patient with me." "I am willing to be as patient as you need," Tyler said, meaning every word. "I have spent years running from one thing to another. I am ready to stay in one place, to build something that lasts. And I would very much like to build it with you, however long that takes." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. They sat like that under the oak tree, holding hands and watching the sun move across the sky. And Tyler thought that this moment was worth all the years of wandering, all the mistakes and regrets if they had led him here. After that day, things changed between them, deepened. They still met at the cemetery every Saturday, but they also started seeing each other during the week. Tyler would stop by the general store on his way through town, and they would talk while she worked, sorting goods and helping customers. She attended a church social where he happened to be, and they danced together, her hand in his, feeling like the most natural thing in the world. The town noticed, of course. Small communities always noticed such things, but the reaction was largely positive. People remembered Tyler's brother fondly, and seeing Tyler settle down with a respectable woman like Delilah seemed to please them. His mother was particularly delighted, inviting Delilah to Sunday dinner with barely contained joy. That dinner was both wonderful and nerve-wracking. Tyler's mother asked 1,000 questions, wanting to know everything about Delilah, her family, her faith, her intentions. But she asked kindly, and Delilah answered with honest warmth that clearly won her over. "Your brother would have liked her," his mother said to Tyler as Delilah helped clear dishes, deliberately giving them a moment alone. "She has his heart for people, his determination to do right by others." "I know," Tyler said, watching Delilah through the doorway as she laughed at something his younger sister said. "That is part of what I love about her." His mother patted his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am glad you came home, son. I am glad you found your way back." "So am I," Tyler said truthfully. By early September, they had planted flowers on every grave in the cemetery. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a neglected field of weathered stones was now a garden of color, a place of beauty and peace. Standing at the entrance and looking across the grounds, Tyler felt a deep sense of accomplishment, of something important completed. But more than the physical work, he had found healing in those months. Tending his brother's grave, honoring the memory of a man he had not been there to bury, had somehow eased the guilt he had carried for so long. It had not erased it, nothing could do that, but it had made it bearable. "What do we do now?" he asked Delilah as they stood together looking at their work. "Now that every grave has flowers, we maintain them," she said. "Make sure the plants stay healthy, replace any that die, continue to water during dry spells." She turned to him with a smile. "The work is not finished just because we have completed the initial planting. Memory requires constant tending." "Then I will be here every Saturday," Tyler promised, "for as long as you will have me." "What if I want more than Saturdays?" Delilah asked, her voice light but her eyes serious. Tyler's heart jumped. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I think I have been patient long enough with myself and with us. I know what I want now, Tyler. I want you. I want a future with you if you want the same thing." He pulled her close, unmindful of anyone who might see them, and kissed her there among the graves they had tended together. She melted into him, her arms going around his neck, and the kiss was everything he had dreamed it might be, sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tyler kept his arms around her waist. "I love you, Delilah Andrews. I have loved you since the first morning I saw you planting flowers and telling stories about men you never knew. You gave me back my purpose and my peace." You made me believe I could be the kind of man my brother was, the kind of man worth honoring. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Tyler Morrison, I will marry you." They were married 6 weeks later in the same church where Delilah sang in the choir. It was a small wedding, just family and close friends, but it felt perfect. Tyler's mother cried through the entire ceremony, and Delilah's uncle walked her down the aisle with visible pride. Tyler had never seen Delilah look more beautiful than she did in her simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Tyler kissed her before God and community, he felt like the luckiest man who had ever lived. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a place that needed work but had good bones and plenty of room to grow. Tyler had saved his money carefully during his wandering years, and he used it to buy into a partnership at a local ranch. The work was hard but honest, and he came home every night to a wife who filled their house with laughter and warmth. They continued their Saturday tradition at the cemetery, though now they went together as husband and wife. They brought their lunch and made a day of it, tending the graves and telling stories to each other, preserving the memories of men who might otherwise be forgotten. Sometimes others joined them. Tyler's mother would come occasionally, placing flowers on James's grave and sharing her own memories. A few older residents, grateful to see the cemetery so beautifully maintained, would stop by with stories of their own to add to Delilah's collection. The cemetery became known throughout the area. People would bring visiting relatives to see it, pointing out the flowers and talking about how it was now the prettiest graveyard in 3 counties. Some called it a shame that such beauty was wasted on the dead, but Tyler and Delilah understood the truth. Beauty was never wasted when it honored memory and love. Winter came, and the flowers died back, but Tyler and Delilah had planned for that. They spent evenings together making wreaths from dried plants and pine boughs, small decorations they placed on each grave so that even in the dead of winter, no one was forgotten. On Christmas Eve, after church services, they walked to the cemetery together through fresh snow that had surprised everyone. The wreaths looked beautiful against the white ground, dark green circles marking each grave like promises kept. They stood at James's grave, holding hands in the cold darkness broken only by lantern light. "I wish you could have known him," Tyler said softly. "He would have loved you, would have appreciated what you started here." "I feel like I do know him in a way," Delilah replied. "Through your stories and your mother's memories, through the way the whole town still speaks of him with respect and affection, that kind of legacy does not fade." "No," Tyler agreed. "It does not." They stood in silence for a while, paying their respects before heading home through the snow. Their small house glowed with lamplight, smoke curling from the chimney, welcoming them back to warmth and life. Spring returned as it always did, and with it came new growth. The cemetery flowers bloomed again, color returning to the hillside in waves of blue and red and gold. Delilah was pregnant by then, just starting to show, and Tyler treated her like she was made of glass. "I am not an invalid," she protested as he insisted on carrying her basket. "Women have babies all the time while continuing their normal activities." "Humor me," he said, kissing her forehead. "Let me take care of you." She rolled her eyes but smiled, allowing him his overprotectiveness because she knew it came from love. Their son was born in late summer, arriving during a thunderstorm that had Delilah terrified until Tyler held her hand and talked her through it, reminding her to breathe, to focus on him, to remember how strong she was. They named him James Tyler Morrison, honoring the brother who had shaped Tyler's life, even in death. When they brought him to the cemetery for the first time, placing flowers on his uncle's grave, Tyler felt a sense of rightness settle over him like a benediction. "We will tell him about you," Tyler said to his brother's memory. "Make sure he knows what kind of man you were, what kind of man to aspire to be." Time passed as it does, marked by seasons and growth. Little James grew into a healthy, curious toddler who loved helping his parents in the cemetery, though his idea of helping mostly involved picking flowers and chasing butterflies. They laughed at his antics and loved him fiercely. 2 years later, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, because she came in spring when the wild roses were blooming. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and from the moment she entered the world, she had both parents wrapped around her tiny fingers. The cemetery work continued, expanded even. Tyler and Delilah started teaching their children about the importance of memory and honor, bringing them along on Saturdays and telling them age-appropriate versions of the stories. James, even at 4, listened with solemn attention, seeming to understand that this was important. Other families in Bandera began to take more interest in their own family plots, inspired by the transformation of the old cemetery. The care and beauty Tyler and Delilah had brought to forgotten graves reminded people that honoring the dead was not just about grief, but about love and continuity. The general store where Delilah had worked promoted her uncle to manager of a second location, and he asked Delilah and Tyler if they would consider taking over the original store. It was a big decision, but they talked it through and decided to accept. Tyler left his ranch work, though he missed the cattle and the open range, and together they ran the store, raising their children in the rooms above while serving their community. The store became a gathering place, somewhere people could come not just for supplies but for conversation and connection. Delilah had a gift for listening, for making people feel heard and valued, and Tyler discovered he had a head for business that surprised him. Together, they built something successful and meaningful. On Saturday mornings, they would close the store and take the children to the cemetery. It became a family tradition, sacred time set aside for remembrance and care. James learned to plant flowers under his mother's patient instruction, and little Rose toddled between the graves, leaving dandelions on random headstones like offerings. Tyler's mother came often, her hair going gray but her spirit still strong. She would hold Rose while Delilah and Tyler worked, and she would tell James stories about his grandfather and uncle, about the Morrison family history and the values they held dear. "You are doing good work," she told Tyler one Saturday as they watched the children play. "Your father would be proud. James would be proud." "I hope so," Tyler said. "I spent so long running from this place, from the expectations and the legacy, but Delilah helped me see that honoring the past does not mean being trapped by it. It means building on it, creating something new that respects what came before. She is a wise woman, your wife." "She is," Tyler agreed, watching Delilah show James how to dig a proper hole for planting. "She saved me in more ways than I can count." Years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges and joys. The country was healing from war and expanding west, and Bandera grew with it. New people arrived and old ones passed on. The cemetery expanded to accommodate new graves, and Tyler and Delilah made sure each new burial received flowers and care, continuing their mission of honoring the dead. Their children grew. James became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and learning, much to his grandmother's delight. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and getting into scrapes, keeping her parents on constant alert. They added another son, Daniel, and then another daughter, Elizabeth, until their home above the store was full of noise and laughter and love. Through it all, the cemetery work remained constant. Every Saturday, weather permitting, they were there. The children grew up knowing those graves as well as their own home, understanding that these silent stones represented real people with real stories, and that their family had taken on the sacred duty of remembrance. When James turned 14, he asked if he could start keeping the notebook, taking over the record keeping his mother had begun so many years ago. Delilah handed it over with visible emotion, knowing this meant her son had truly understood the importance of what they did. "The stories matter as much as the flowers," she told him. "Maybe more. Anyone can plant bluebonnets, but preserving memory, that is something special." "I understand," James said seriously. "I will take care of it." And he did, adding new entries as new graves appeared, interviewing old-timers to add details to older entries, treating the notebook like the treasure it was. Tyler watched his son bent over the notebook, carefully transcribing a story someone had shared, and felt his heart swell with pride. This was legacy. This was what James Morrison had died for, really. The idea that people mattered, that their lives had value, that someone should stand up and honor them. His brother's legacy lived on, not just in memory but in action, passed down to a new generation who would carry it forward. One autumn evening, when the children were all in bed and the store was closed for the night, Tyler and Delilah sat together on their small porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tyler asked, taking her hand. "When you first started planting flowers on those graves, did you think it would lead to all this?" "No," Delilah admitted. "I was just trying to find purpose, to make sense of my grief. I had no idea it would become something bigger, that it would connect me to you, that it would shape our whole life together." "I am grateful you did it," Tyler said. "Grateful you saw value in honoring the forgotten. If you had not been there that morning planting flowers, I might have ridden right past, might never have stopped, never have talked to you, never have fallen in love." "I think we would have found each other eventually," Delilah said. "Some things are meant to be, maybe so. But I am glad it happened the way it did, glad our love grew out of that cemetery, out of honoring the cowboy my brother used to be and all the other men who deserved remembrance." He pulled her closer. "You taught me that the past does not have to be a weight to carry. It can be a foundation to build on." "We taught each other that," Delilah corrected. "I was as lost as you were when we met. You gave me companionship and partnership. You made me believe I could have a future, not just a mission." They sat in comfortable silence, 30 years of marriage between them now, and Tyler marveled at how his life had turned out. He had left Bandera as a restless, 20-year-old chasing undefined dreams, and he had returned as a broken 27-year-old carrying more regrets than hopes. But then he had found Delilah in that cemetery, honoring his brother, honoring all the forgotten men, and she had given him back his purpose and his peace. She had loved him when he did not love himself. She had shown him how to honor the past while building a future. She had given him children and a home and a life full of meaning. And it had all started with flowers on graves, with a woman who believed that remembering the dead mattered, that every life had value worth preserving. "I love you," he said simply, words they exchanged every day but which never lost their power. "I love you too," Delilah replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time demands. Tyler's mother passed peacefully in her sleep at 82, and they buried her next to her eldest son, planting her favorite roses on the grave. The children grew and married and started families of their own, though James stayed in Bandera and took over the store, continuing the family business. Tyler and Delilah grew older, their hair going gray, their movements slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. They still went to the cemetery every Saturday, though now their grandchildren often did the heavy work while they supervised and told stories. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the town held a celebration in their honor. The mayor gave a speech about how their dedication to the cemetery had changed Bandera, making it a town that valued its history and honored its dead. Other communities had copied their example, creating memorial gardens in their own cemeteries. But for Tyler and Delilah, the real reward was not recognition or praise. It was the life they had built together, the family they had raised, the love that had sustained them through every challenge. Tyler was 68 years old when he died, passing suddenly from a heart attack while working in the cemetery on a sunny Saturday morning. He collapsed among the flowers he had planted in the place where he had found his purpose and his love, and by all accounts, it was a peaceful end. Delilah held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face even as she whispered that she loved him, that she would see him again, that he had been everything she needed and more. They buried him next to his brother, and the whole town turned out for the funeral. The preacher spoke about Tyler's transformation from a wanderer to a devoted husband, father, and community member. He spoke about the legacy of love and remembrance Tyler and Delilah had created together. But it was James, their eldest son, who gave the eulogy that made everyone weep. He spoke about his father's dedication to honoring the past, about how he had taught his children that every person mattered, every story deserved to be told. He spoke about the love between his parents, a love that had grown from shared purpose into something deep and unshakable. "My father used to say that my mother saved him," James said, his voice breaking. "That she gave him back his purpose when he was lost, but the truth is they saved each other. They built something beautiful together, not just in this cemetery but in their lives. They showed all of us what it means to love deeply, to work with dedication, to honor those who came before while creating something lasting for those who come after." After the funeral, after everyone had gone home, Delilah returned to the cemetery alone. She stood at Tyler's fresh grave, looking at the flowers their children and grandchildren had placed there, and she allowed herself to fully feel the grief she had been holding back. "I miss you already," she whispered. "I do not know how to do Saturdays without you. I do not know how to do anything without you." But even as she said it, she knew what he would tell her if he could. He would tell her to keep going, to continue their work, to remember him by living fully. He would tell her that love did not end with death, that memory kept people alive in the hearts of those who cherished them. So that is what she did. Delilah continued going to the cemetery every Saturday, though now she went with her children and grandchildren surrounding her. She taught them the stories Tyler had known, adding her own memories of him to the collection. She made sure his grave was always covered in flowers, the brightest and most beautiful in the whole cemetery. She lived another 12 years, years filled with the love of family and the satisfaction of work well done. She saw more grandchildren born, saw James's children take up the family tradition of cemetery care, saw the legacy she and Tyler had built continue into a new generation. When she finally passed at the age of 80, peacefully in her sleep just as she had always hoped, they buried her next to Tyler. The double headstone read, Tyler Morrison, 1851–1919, Delilah Andrews Morrison, 1853–1931. Together they honored the forgotten, together they rest in love. Their story became legend in Bandera, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the essential truth remained. A woman who had planted flowers on graves to honor the forgotten, including a cowboy she had never known, had found love with that cowboy's brother. Together they had transformed grief into beauty, loss into legacy, and in doing so had built a love that endured beyond death. The cemetery they had tended with such care became a lasting monument, not just to the dead buried there, but to the power of remembrance and love. Generations of Morrison descendants continued the tradition, planting flowers every spring, maintaining the graves, collecting and preserving stories. And every year on the anniversary of that first Saturday, when Tyler had found Delilah planting flowers among the graves, the family would gather at the cemetery. They would tend the graves together, they would tell the old stories, and they would place fresh flowers on the graves of Tyler and Delilah, honoring the love that had started it all. The town of Bandera grew and changed over the decades and centuries that followed, but the cemetery remained a constant, a beautiful reminder that love and memory could transform even death into something meaningful. People would visit from far away, having heard the story of the man who found a woman planting flowers on graves, including his brothers, and how they had fallen in love while honoring the dead. The story resonated because it spoke to something universal: the human need to be remembered to matter, to have our lives acknowledged as valuable. Tyler and Delilah had understood that, had built their lives around that understanding, and in doing so had created something that outlasted them both. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman tending graves, a man looking for purpose, and the love that grew between them as they worked side by side to honor the forgotten. But simple stories can be profound, and love that grows from shared values and dedication can last forever, echoing through generations long after the original lovers have joined those they honored in rest. The flowers still bloom in that cemetery in Bandera, Texas, tended by hands descended from Tyler and Delilah Morrison. The stories are still told, written in notebooks passed down through the family. And the graves are still honored, each one marked with beauty and remembered with love, a testament to two people who understood that the greatest legacy is not what we accumulate, but how we love and who we remember. Tyler had been a wanderer searching for home, and Delilah had been a woman searching for purpose. They found both in each other, in a cemetery on a hillside, among flowers and memories, and the silent testimony of lives that had come before. Their love story was built on honoring the cowboy Tyler's brother had been, and in honoring him, they created something worth honoring themselves. A love as enduring as the Texas hills, as beautiful as wildflowers in spring, as lasting as memory itself.